various Episcopal areas, to try to reach as many people as we can, especially delegates to the General Conference. And so we're gathered here in the Midwest. Before we go any further, we want to recognize, acknowledge the presence of the presiding bishop over the Midwest area, Bishop Darrell B. Stons Sr. And we cannot move forward without asking Bishop Stons to come and greet us in his own way. Let us receive Bishop Stons.
Thank you so much. You may be seated. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Witherspoon, and greetings in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Greetings in his name.
I just want to commend the Connectional Lay Council and the International Ministers and Lay Association for making it available for people throughout our Zion to be exposed the way you are doing through these regional summits. And we just commend you, and I'm looking forward to being a part. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Thank you, sir. I want to ask at this time for Sister Lakeisha Womack to come, who is our technology person, our website person, et cetera, et cetera. She will come and give instructions, any instructions that are needed, especially for those Zoomers and other persons who would like to bring up the legislation from our website. But she will come at this time, Sister Womack.
Thank you, and hello to everyone who is online. If you all who are here want to speak, I would ask that you would please come to the podium, because the camera is facing the podium, and that way everyone can see you. Some of the people do have their cameras turned on so we can see them, and some have chosen not to, but they do have the opportunity to actually speak through the Zoom platform. And then there's also a chat box. So all of you who are listening, there's a chat box. So if you all want to type questions in, you're able to type questions in. And then if you would like to actually speak, then you can let us know, and then we'll be able to acknowledge you from the computer. So we are excited that we're offering this interactive experience, because as we know, it is expensive to travel across the connection, and with technology, we want to see how we can start to utilize it so that more people can participate in these processes, especially those who are not able to financially travel and be physically present. If we have any kinks, I pray that we will work our way through them, being this is our first time doing this, and just see how we can continue to make the system work for us. Sounds good?
Amen. Amen.
We also we're thankful to Reverend Barbara Hagler, pastor of this church, Broadway Temple A89 Church, and her congregation, and to the presiding elder, Reverend Olacy Evans, for hosting us for this occasion. Amen. So at this point, we will first, and I'd like to thank Dr. Yvonne Tracy and Reverend Eric Shoemake, presiding elder Shoemake, for having assisted us in this process, having helped to lead us in this process with the knowledge that is at the table. God has blessed us to be able to come to this point. And so I'd like at this point to turn this over to Dr. Yvonne Tracy and Reverend Eric Shoemake, who will lead us throughout our summit and give us further direction for this evening. Dr. Tracy, Reverend Shoemake.
Yes.
Those who will be speaking will have to speak at the podium so that Zoomers can zoom in.
Good evening, Zion.
Good evening.
Times are exciting, and guess what? We're a part of it.
Amen.
So certainly to our bishop, who took the time to be able to come with us and be with us personally, Bishop Starnes, And to all the other members of the Board of Bishops who may be online and listening in, certainly would like to acknowledge them and certainly appreciate them, as well as our general, our connectional officers, far and wide, and also to the members here at Broadway Temple. We certainly do appreciate the opportunity to be able to come to the Midwest, to be able to share and hear your voices in the process as we're trying to complete our legislation development for the 51st General Conference that will be up and coming before you know it. Time is really fleeting. It was a year ago at this time that we met in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and we began the process of what I would call grassroots think tank thinking and activities in terms of what it is that we would like to do collaboratively to be able to support our denomination in developing and going to higher heights. And it does not yet appear what Zion can be or become, but it's going to take us to help make that happen. The goal of what we're trying to do through the legislation development summits is to be able to have our time at General Conference spent more productively. And we can do that by sharing our ideas and our thoughts now on legislation that people thought about or have on their hearts or minds. When we began this process, we started with a registration process that not only included your name and all of that, but we wanted to know what was on your heart, what was on your mind regarding the AME Zion Church. Then we collected that information and we divided it out among the various committees that, according to the Book of Discipline, would have the authority or the right to be able to address it from that context. And so we've been very successful so far in hearing people. But now we don't need to just hear you. We need to understand, what do you really think we might need to do to improve upon what some of the committees have been working on? We did want to have an opportunity to upload the latest thinking of the committees, but we had 51 reports and all of them did not come in on a timely enough basis for us to be able to give the attention it needed to upload it in the system. So what we're going to do is, following this session, we will gather those information and upload them so that at your leisure, you can still have time to look it over, think about it, and give us some feedback so we can get back to the committees and have a more inclusive understanding about what the thinking is and how we might need to improve. There's no right, no wrong, unless it's not in the Book of Discipline or in the Bible. So we want to be free thinkers because we're the Freedom Church. Our presiding elder Shoemaker is going to also help at this time in looking at and sharing with you some of the thoughts of the committees. I will help to provide some of the background because I've been working very closely with some of the committee chairs, and we're only going to deal with the resolves, the final resolve. So therefore, if there's anything you'd like to add to it or think about in terms of what could help structure to make it a stronger resolution, or maybe it's a resolution that doesn't even need to go forward. We need to hear that so that we can gain consensus on where we go from here. The first, if you happen to have your Book of Discipline, it'd be very easy for you to follow us because we're starting with part 4 of the Book of Discipline, and that deals with the conferences. Under part 4, you have General Conference, Connectional Council, Quarterly Conference, and then we have a slot for other. The consultants in that group was Reverend Barbara Hagler and Reverend Dr. William Jordan. And please pray for Reverend Jordan because I know that Jordan, he's been having some health challenges. And we also had Mr. Urban Reed and Yvonne Baskerville and Reverend Antoinette Joyner working independently on some information. So the first information we want to share with you is the thought that came through, and Reverend Shoemake, if you could come up, presiding elder, had to deal with legislation regarding young adult delegates to the general conference. And the second part of the work had to do with the criteria they felt we needed to improve, not only for young adults, but for all. So if on the first one we cover is on the young adults, if you can just give us a overall thinking of where they are, and I think that this information here would be important, and their rationale and what their formula might be, we might be able to highlight those.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. For this young adult delegation to the General Conference, the thought was that it would be mandated that the young adult delegates be assigned to the General Conference, requiring a young adult delegate from each annual conference to the General Conference shall be elected by an electoral college of the laity and or clergy delegates on the third day of the opening session of the annual conference. And each annual conference shall elect a young adult ages 21 through 40. The delegates are to be vetted through quarterly and district conferences and annual conferences. Formula will be developed for circumstances such as mission conferences and overseas conferences. The rationale behind this, it received merit that it ought to go before the General Conference. That by 2025, 75% of those elected would be young adults going representing our church at the General Conference and have the value of a grandparent generation, not concerning about waiting till their time or until they're old enough, but they will be included in what the church is doing at the young age. And the focus will shift to the next generation, meaning that we need to be inclusive of younger folk in what our church is doing, even at the General Conference level. And so the goal behind and the aim behind this legislation is to be inclusive of young folk in our General Conference. As most of you know, when we go to annual conference, that most of the folks who are elected are more senior. They feel like they have a right because they've been in the church for X amount of years and served in X amount of committees and things, and young folks are excluded. So this is to be inclusive of our younger people. The formula for those conferences with 4 or more delegates, one of each clergy and lay, should be a young adult. And it shall be an elected person. So meaning that if there are 10 people running for the delegation or for a delegate, that of the 10, one of them, it would be mandatory that it be a young adult between the age of 21 and 40. In these conferences with 3 or less delegates, 1 lay or clergy, such as a mission or overseas conference, should also include 1 of those persons as a delegate.
While we're on this topic, I just wanted to add one point that did come up for discussion and might help us to be able to move forward, is that we do have some of the young adults that are elected to, like in the Christian Education Department and the missionaries that do have a lot of exposure to what goes on at Connectional Council and general conferences and other what you might say, connectional meetings. And so it might be that, I remember Dr. Hunt said that he at one time had recommended that whoever is the president of DCYC would have a seat at the table at the general conference, because we do know that that's one young adult that has exposure and also has the support of the young adults who have gone forward to elect him, and therefore their confidence in his leadership is there. So that might be another way of looking at this, because we just don't want to elect and place young adults in seats where they have no knowledge of what is going on, and we have crucial issues that we are facing as a church, and every vote counts. There's no one that's sitting there whose vote does not count. So unless we have special training sessions for these young adults, or we select them because of the position that they might be in, along with that goes the opportunity to be a delegate to the general conference, would be some food for thought in terms of developing this resolution to move forward. Thank you.
And so this is the eligibility for general conference lay delegates. In the resolution, it says, be it further resolved that in order to be sensitive to our brothers and sisters of the mission and overseas conferences and not to place a financial hardship on them, especially our indigenous members, this change will not be applicable to these candidates. The rationale, the new language offers clarity and transparency as to where to locate a meaningful, the meanings and the terms members in full connection and the members in good standing within the General Conference Charter that describe eligibility to be lay delegates. The enhancement to the language removes the ambiguity of the current language and places this information in a more prominent place. Placement in this chapter gives the terms background context. Thirdly, this change will result in a new candidate pool comprised of more experienced laypersons, and this new vetting process will minimize the polarity contest mentality in the lay delegate election, meaning that persons who think that because of their popularity and their experience that they are more qualified to be delegates, this would offset that in the lay delegate election. Offering a higher degree of impartiality, the church will have a higher assurance of electing lay delegates who are knowledgeable about the church business, operation before the convening of the General Conference, and vetting issues coming before the legislative body. This will promote greater efficiency during the General Conference deliberations. The United Methodist Church already has language in their discipline regarding eligibility without regard to age. This change will put us on par with one of our sister denominations as bringing us into the 21st century. That's the
What is the language?
You know what, on this one, you probably have to go back to the beginning because it's not as conclusive. So, good point, Bishop. You're gonna have to start right here.
whereas
Yes, I think you're gonna have to read her whole document in order for us to get a sense of the language. Thank you.
this is what you were in reference to, Bishop. It says, whereas the General Conference is the supreme rule-making body of the AME Zion Church, and delegates are charged with the tremendous responsibility of conducting important business for the general interests of the connection, which has immediate long-range impact. Whereas the discipline requires that the General Conference be composed of an equal number of ministerial and lay delegates, and that it be elected from the annual conference of which they are members. Whereas no lay member shall be elected a delegate to the general conference who has not been a member of our church in full connection for 4 consecutive years preceding election. Whereas the discipline does not explicitly explain what it means to be a member in full connection or a member in good standing, except in the glossary on pages 460 and 463. Whereas a credible delegate to the General Conference must be knowledgeable about the AME Zion rules, polity, and General Conference procedures in order to effectively carry out their responsibility. Be it resolved that parts of 4, Chapter 1, General Conference, page 35, Section 107 to 3 of the 2016 discipline be revised as follows. Delegate, or delete. Delete, no lay member shall be elected a delegate to the General Conference who has not been a member of our church in full connection for 4 consecutive years preceding election. Replace that with a lay member desiring to be a delegate to the General Conference shall be vetted in the following manner. Be a member, 1, be a member of our church in full connection for 4 consecutive years preceding election. A member in full connection is baptized probationer who has successfully completed their preparatory period, recommended by the leaders on examination by the pastor before the church, given satisfactory assurance of their faith, and a willingness to observe and keep the rules of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, or a member received in our church on certificate of membership. Be a committed, dedicated, working, and active member with dependable leadership experience at the local, district, and annual conference and or connectional levels. Have attended, registered for a minimum of 4 local district conferences and connectional meetings. Know the AME Zion church polity, know the hierarchy of the church, know general conference procedures, demonstrated knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedures. Be it further resolved that the definition of full member and the member in good standing be retained in the glossary for cross-reference. Be it further resolved that the process of lay delegates be standardized throughout the church by the submission of written statements of interest to include all of the criteria outlined in items 1 through 7, using the template to be developed by the General Secretary. Be it further resolved that there be no language change in Part 4, Chapter 1, General Conference 111, which states, "It shall be the duty of the presiding bishop to see that no one is elected a delegate to the General Conference who is not entitled to that privilege according to the new law." Be it further resolved that a lay delegate be eligible to offer themselves to be a delegate without regard to age. Be it further resolved that in order to be sensitive to our brothers and sisters of the mission and overseas conferences and not to place a financial hardship upon them, especially our indigenous members, this change will not be applicable to these candidates. Rationale: the new language offers clarity and transparency as to where and to locate the meaning of the term members in full connection and a member in good standing within the General Conference chapter that describes eligibility to be a lay delegate.
Okay.
We look forward to people's comments.
Any comment?
Dr. Tracy said we're looking forward to comments from those that are here or visiting with us online.
Can you read what's in the discipline right now, that one line that says about full connection? Can you read that again?
Have you got it right
It's
there?
supposed to be deleted.
It says delete. No lay member shall be elected a delegate to the general conference who has not been a member of our church in full connection for 4 consecutive years preceding election.
But this resolution is expanding it to include good standing. And then it's clarifying what good standing is, where the current one just talks about full connection.
I'm sorry, what was the bishop's comment?
The bishop's comment was that the resolution is expanding the definition to include good standing, a person in good standing, whereas the entry in the discipline as it currently stands talks about members in full connection. Is that right, Bishop?
Adding some things that,
Oh, I got this.
And the definition for good standing is already established in the book of discipline, although it's in the glossary, it would have to be moved forward.
discipline as it is now does not even mention good standing.
Not in the context, but in the glossary it
I'm
is.
talking about in the
Oh.
general conference.
In the
in that
general
language.
conference section,
In the
no.
language as to who can be elected a delegate, it says nothing about good standing.
No,
So this person in their resolution wants to add that
right.
and wants to say you gotta know Robert's Rule of Order to be in full connection to good standing. They're adding things that I think I've said enough.
They deleted what was there and then expanded upon.
They want to make it more than just
Right.
full connection.
You all have to come to the mic
Oh,
so people can hear for Zoomers what's been said, if you don't mind.
Can the voices be picked up on the microphone?
I said it's tough.
Or did the people have to come to the,
Can you all hear if they're not at the microphone?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Good.
okay, so then you can take the
So
microphone.
if we
for
can,
comments.
we've got a couple of marshals here. If they can take the mic to the persons that have comments, then
And
that way it'll be
identify yourself.
amplified. And please identify yourself.
Harold Starnes. I was just saying that this resolution is expanding the requirements for being a lay delegate beyond just being in full connection as it is now. It is going to expand it to include being in good standing and being knowledgeable and going to meetings as requirements over and above being in full connection. That was what I was trying to say.
Tracy.
Are there any other comments? There's the gentleman there, the comment.
Dr. Sharp.
Charles Sharp, Kentucky Conference. I would point out that this resolution would require a very rigorous vetting process and administration to accompany it. I.e. tests on Robert's Rule of Order, I would assume would be in order. And then the issue is what level of proficiency would be expected in that knowledge of policy, some reporting of attendance at appropriate meetings. So it will bring quite a significant administration in order to execute, and keep that in mind. In fact, those orders for testing and proficiency should be included along with the resolution to make it more clear.
Note takers taking notes.
Other comment?
Yvonne Tracy, I have often, as I've spoken with others, members of the Zion Connection about delegates and having higher standards and qualifications, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that every annual conference is entitled to have representation. every annual conference, the delegates might not have the opportunity to be able to participate in some of the connectional meetings or other exposure that some of us have that might be what we would call in the thick of things. So I would say that we would probably need to provide some exceptions to this and have it for where you have indigenous or mission conferences that might not have the same opportunity, but still those conferences would have a voice. And I also think that we don't want to create any process that's going to weigh down because it's hard enough to get people to take time off to go anyway. And so in every conference, there's always challenges getting people. I've been around Zion and we've almost had to beg people to get about their seats just to offer themselves. So you have some conferences that are very competitive and you have some that are very scarce in terms of having people that have not the willingness, they have the willingness, but they just might not have the means to be able to attend. So I think that if we look and lean more towards the judgment of the presiding elders and the bishops regarding the persons that are offering themselves as a delegate and go through some type of scrutiny on that part and make sure that they're in good standing and that they do have the church at heart and want to be dedicated to doing this, that might be an easier way to just improve upon where we are now. We just want to make sure that there's accountability. Nobody wants to see somebody just go to the general conference and not make a contribution at all, nor show any interest. So we're just trying to think about ways to help bring it to another level. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Witherspoon goes next. Yes.
Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. I'd like to make a report, give the renderings from the committee that worked on under qualifications, rules, and reception of deacons and elders, local deacons and elders, bishops, presiding elders, pastors in charge, and other things, led by Reverend Yolanda Lowe, and also assisted. Her assistant was Mrs. Clarice Smith Jarvis. And so I have asked that the report be passed out, and so I'd like to read the recommendations that are coming from this committee. So let me first go to the Book of Discipline, and if you have your disciplines with you, paragraph 224 of the 2012 discipline, and I want to read 1 through 5, and then I will read the recommendations for continuity's sake, so that people will be clear about what it says. Paragraph 224, the 48th session of the General Conference directs that any elder meeting the following criteria is eligible to be elected to the office of bishop. Number 1, who has been a traveling minister for 20 years in the A.B. Zion Church. Number 2, who has attained the age of 40 years. Number 3, who has one living spouse, meaning a former spouse and present spouse cannot both be alive. Number 4, who has an earned advanced degree in theology from an accredited institution of higher learning, must submit transcripts of same to the General Secretary at the time of filing as an official candidate. And number 5, who has not been expelled from our church or another communion. So what would be added to this, and let me read as it is written, what the proposal is. Whereas the nomination approved a plan for indigenous leadership at the 2012 General Conference, which became effective between 2016 and 2020. Whereas that the bishops assigned to these episcopal areas helped to prepare the area for indigenous leadership by identifying and presenting qualified candidates, we introduced to put in place the necessary measures. Whereas that the qualifications for becoming a candidate as an indigenous bishop in our church not be changed or altered in any way to demean the office, we recommend the following paragraph be added to chapter 5 and inserted after paragraph 224 to the 2016 Book of Discipline of the AME Zion Church. The 49th session of the General Conference directs that indigenous bishops be elected to indigenous areas. The following be met. Candidates for episcopal service in indigenous areas will meet the criteria required for eligibility as prescribed by the preceding article for paragraph 224 with an ATS accreditation accepted. Number 2, the candidate must be a legal resident of the episcopal area in which they are seeking to serve. This must be their primary residence 9 months prior to the opening of the General Conference. The elected bishop covenant to domicile at least 10 out of 12 months each year in their native land. Number 3, the candidate must be a member of the annual conference within the episcopal area and in good standing. Number 4, the annual conference and presiding bishop must verify and certify the candidate's eligibility. The candidate must then be certified by the Board of Bishops and authorized for the ballot by the General Secretary and Auditor of the AME Zion Church. Number 5, if no indigenous candidate is elected, the following slot or slots will be for the election by the General Conference. Only the persons who meet the qualifications for indigenous leadership and the indigenous area are eligible on the indigenous leadership ballot. And number 6, bishops elected in their respective episcopal area through residency and assignment will serve without rotation for the maximum of 20 years of active episcopal service, at which time retirement compensation will be granted. This is submitted by the Reverend Yolanda Lowe and her committee. Is there any discussion, any questions that persons may have? I'll do my level best to explain and answer those questions for the committee.
How do you know I thought in my mind?
Got a question mark over there.
How does this differ from the way it is now?
I think the premise behind this is to make sure there's clarity, since there are several persons who said that they were unclear as to what has really taken place. Even though it may have been attempted to be explained to the General Conference, but to give clarity and that thing.
I also understand in talking with the General Secretary Auditor, as I asked him, why isn't there any information currently in the Book of Discipline if we have already elected indigenous bishops at the General Conference? And the information I received from him is because it was not placed in resolution form. As a matter of fact, if you can recall at the General Conference, the presiding bishop had to call the editor of the Star of Zion. She had to go back in the archives and bring up what it is that the Board of Bishops had put together as the requirements at that time, because the restructuring commission turned that portion over to the Board of Bishops to develop. When we, as the delegates, adopted the indigenous bishop for 2012, 2016, we did not have any process or procedures that we put in place to make sure that it could be implemented. So therefore, the restructuring turned it over to the Board of Bishops to come up with that process. So all we would like to do now, in addition to whatever other little adjustments for clarity, is to make sure it gets into the Book of Discipline.
Amen. I also like to, from the same committee, there is a, and you may have received the second document as well, okay. As relates to curriculum and duties of exhorters, curriculum and duties of exhorters. This is an attempt to ensure continuity all across ministerial lines as well, that I want to read to you, that comes also from this committee. And they work also with the ad hoc in some ways, but this committee has done this work. Let me read this to you. This is presented by the Committee on Ministry. Whereas there's currently no clear definition or description of an exhorter, whereas the specific course of studies to be pursued are not stated, now therefore be it resolved, the Committee on Ministry submits the following recommendations and revisions. An exhorter be defined as a licensed layperson who has been called by God for non-clergy ministry. Number two, the exhorter should be a more integral part of the local church with the guidance and direction of the pastor in charge. Number three, the labors of an exhorter may include discourses and teaching assignments. Number four, the course of studies for an exhorter shall include the following topics: Methodist history, AME Zion history, teaching, and the catechism. Number five, the course of studies program shall culminate in 1 or 2 years, depending on evaluation. Number six, the course of studies should be implemented by the district examining committee in collaboration with the local church pastor in charge. Number seven, after completion of the exhorter's course of studies, the exhorter will be reevaluated by the pastor and class leader as to the exhorter's call to ministry. Some may be led to continue on to the local preacher's track, while others may have a desire only to be a lay speaker. Number eight, pastors are encouraged to seriously and intentionally assist exhorters with tools that will aid in their development of the exhorter's spiritual gifts. Number nine, those who are led to follow the local preacher's track should be allowed to do so for receiving recommendation of the pastor and vote by the quarterly conference. Number 10, revise paragraph 254, number 1, to read discourses and teaching assignments. And number 11, paragraph 254 shall include the following revision to number 4, change held to attended. This is coming from the Committee on Ministry. Is there any dialogue? Yeah. From those who are Zooming, is there any dialogue, any questions, any concerns?
You can't do away with the question.
Chair, can you read revised paragraph, but 254?
254, yes. Paragraph 254 of the Book of Discipline 2016 states, the exhorter shall render to the quarterly conference and district conference a report of their labors in the following form. Number 1, number of discourses delivered. Number 2, number of prayer meetings held. Number 3, number of times attended Sunday school. Number 4, number of class meetings held. Number 5, the studies that probably should be the studies that are being pursued. Number 6, any miscellaneous items.
Which one do you want to change?
We want to change 254 to include held to attended.
On what? On number 4?
Yes,
Which means
number of class meetings held.
you don't want them to hold no class.
I think that is to require to make sure that they are attending the class meetings themselves on a regular basis.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Um,
Yes, we can.
this is Sister Ruth Goff. I couldn't make the thing work when you were talking about the lay delegates. So at some point, can we go back to that? Now that I've got an idea of how it works, to be able to get through to you guys. I don't have any questions on the exhorters. I just wanted to say that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Any others who are Zooming? Yes, sir.
Would it make sense to say held or attended?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's important if they're holding class, that means they're class.
So noted. Any other comments or recommendations, so forth?
We have a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Reverend Love asks, does the exhorters legislation speak to where the classes take place?
Repeat that once more.
Does the exhorters legislation speak to where the classes take place?
No, it does not. However, it does speak to the pastor in charge of making sure that it is done, that it takes place. So therefore, the pastor in charge would definitely designate where that would be.
District examining.
Any other questions or discussion? Thank you so much, Zoomers. Thank you so much, those who are present. Humbly submitted.
Thank you, Dr. Witherspoon. The next section that we'll look at will be the judicial administration.
The lay delegates.
Dr. Tracy said she would pick up on that question on the lay delegate.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. She had the question now?
Yes, I have. Yes, ma'am. My concern is who is going to test, annual conferences have dwindled down their time so much that the election is almost an afterthought. I mean, they do it when it says, but there's not a lot of time placed on it. So who's gonna do all of this examining? And does it mean another report coming from the presiding elder? And the discipline does not speak on previously, before the annual conference, presenting yourself as a wannabe delegate. It just talks about at the annual conference. So from what you're saying, anybody who's interested will have to go through some type of vetting and present themselves before we even get to annual conference. Am I correct? I guess.
Thank you, Ruth, for the question. Although we're a connectional church, sometimes we have disconnectional processes. in terms of what we do in order to get to the end result of what it is that we're trying to do. As far as the delegates are concerned, I don't know what happens particularly in other conferences, but I do know that the General Secretary Auditor typically needs to know ahead of time what candidates or persons are offering themselves for delegates so that he can have the ballot or whatever provisions he needs in order for the election to take place. So consequently, I know that in our particular conference, there's a call for persons who are seeking to offer themselves as a delegate coming through our presiding elder at the district conference. Those names are collected and then sent on to the bishop. And then the bishop scrutinizes the names to make sure that his responsibility that's identified in the book of discipline is being adhered to, that the time is, the 4 years is in place, and what other qualities that he's looking for in the person to say, yes, their name is eligible to go on the ballot. As far as I'm concerned, this is usually taking place prior to the seating of the annual conference and does not interfere at all with the time of the annual conference. And when the college gets together and proceeds to the election. Am I on the right track with you?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I have been a delegate many times, and the process has never been the same all the time. So this annual conference, the bishop made a declaration that only the elected delegates would be on the ballot. The elected delegates from their local church. Many of those people were not even interested in being a delegate. The previous time I was elected, they didn't make a list at all and would not make any adjustments because some of the delegates voting didn't know the last name of the delegate. So I think it needs to be spelled out absolutely. Because as a person a lay person who's been elected, it is many times unfair or at least confusing to the people who might want to run or the people who are going to vote on those that are going.
Well, I think that you're on the road to helping us to come up with thinking this through, and then maybe we don't want to over legislate, but we certainly want to make sure that it's a fair process across the board. So let us continue this dialogue and see what we can do before we have to close the door on this time frame wise.
And one more thing.
Yes.
The youth delegate. As I said, I have been a delegate for many years. I have not always been 75 years old. So I was a youth delegate the first time I went. You don't, if people want to run, they just need to decide to learn the church and run. I don't think that, I know we want to talk about the millennials, but just like this meeting that we're having today, they're at work. So they can't always be there. And you have to make adjustments for what you want to do in the church. I don't think it's fair or makes sense to legislate how a youth delegate gets there, because all of us started off as youth. We didn't all start off as seniors. And I don't know that you necessarily think you have a right to be a delegate. I just think you have a right to run. And as we mess with the number of delegates that might know the church by limiting out delegates that don't know the church. And they can learn the church. They can decide if they want to learn the church. So I have a real objection to this. We're going to choose out one delegate to be the youth delegate. You got to be between 18 and 40. Because that's 18 and 40-year-olds are not always incompatible. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you're uncompatible and that you're going to know more because you're a youth delegate or a senior delegate. That is an objection that I have.
Thank you, Ruth. Those are great observations. You certainly put those in mind, and thank you for sharing them with others who may have the same thoughts or feelings. And then we'll just make sure that we're hearing the points and we look to develop it so that we'll see where it goes regarding the favor of the, where it lasts. I'm sorry. We'll see where it goes in terms of the final resolution, and then certainly we all have an opportunity to have some input. Thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, am I heard? Can someone hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Sheila, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted some clarity if we're talking about delegates to the General Conference. Of course, the discipline is clear that it starts with lay regarding Electoral College. And in the West, we actually took nominees from the third day of the annual conference, which is the day that the Electoral College is supposed to convene. Are we talking about some clear language as to who can offer themselves, or did I miss that conversation?
Wanting to know if we are trying to set some guidelines for who can run and when they have to submit their application or thought for the process.
No, that's not included in the resolution. I didn't see that in the resolution. It was just trying to set aside a seat so that we would ensure that we have intergenerational representation.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is about the young adults, making sure there's a young adult from every annual conference, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I do understand the necessity for it, and I do hear what Sister Ruth is saying. But as young adults who are working, if they wish to take on this responsibility, then they need to schedule some time to do it. So it's not like they're going to be forced to do it. If no one offers themselves for this position, then it will not be filled, is my understanding. So, if approved, yeah. But if they do offer themselves, then there has to be some education and instruction around what it really means to be a delegate, what's required, what's necessary in order to offer yourself, what financial impact you may or may not have. So I think that I support the youth being included, not youth, young adults, 18 to 40, to me is more young adult than youth. I think that there has to be some clarity around what's expected so that annual conferences won't be forced to put in a young adult who really doesn't want to do the work. That was my concern.
And that's the general concern of the legislation, is to ensure that the young adult that is elected is committed, also has some understanding of the church and how the process moves forward in offering and voting on legislation before the church.
Understood. And would that be done by the lay council? Would that be done by the bishop? Who would be responsible for ensuring, maybe the local church pastor, who would be responsible for ensuring that this information is disseminated to the local church for potential young adult candidates?
That piece has not been discussed in this legislation. As a matter of fact, Dr. Sharp raised the same concern a few moments ago. Okay. And Dr. Tracy's response was that we'll
Taken in consideration.
We take it into consideration
Okay,
As feedback to the committee.
to the committee.
Right.
thank
We
you,
write these, we're just representing the work of the committee.
thank you.
I think
Appreciate
Dr.
that.
Sharp was addressing the lay delegate question and the qualifications that are being expanded for those who want to offer themselves for lay delegate, which I think was her initial question. Are we talking about who can offer themselves? Because it was saying you not only need to be in full connection, but you gotta be in good standing. You gotta have attended all these meetings. You gotta know Robert's Rule of Orders. So her first question was asking about, were we expanding who is eligible to be a delegate? And I think that other resolution was doing that, or was seeking to do that. Am I right?
Bishop, the legislation is concerning young adult
The
delegates.
other one, the other resolution, there was two resolutions. One was about lay delegates. They had about 6 items that you have to qualify for.
Yes, sir.
That's what she's asking about. Is that eligibility for lay delegates being expanded?
There's two. Yeah, one for the emphasis on the regular delegates' eligibility is to expand the knowledge base. The
That's what
one
she's
for
asking
the young
about.
adult is just to get space to get.
So Dr. Quintana, the resolve for this for us is that we will take this information and send it back to the committee. All we're doing is passing the information on to us that the committee has submitted, and we'll send the responses back to them for their further consideration.
I understand. Thank you so much.
I think she was wanting to know, was there a resolution trying to expand the what required to be eligible? He was asking.
What's that?
Is the resolution expanding the requirements and of eligibility for a lay delegate?
Yes, it was.
And so if your question, Dr. Quintana, is does the resolution expand the qualifications for persons as lay delegates? The answer is yes.
Okay, and I assume the committee will ferret out all the levels that are required to implement. the
We'll send it
recommendation.
back to committee for their consideration.
I understand. Thank you.
Dr. Witherspoon.
Before you do that, if you do not have your computer or phone on mute, could you please mute yourself because the other participants are hearing some feedback? Thank you.
Dr. Quintana, also, and for others who may be concerned too, the question was raised, ensuring persons who are running for delegate are vetted properly to make sure that they want to do the work. We're prayerful that persons who run for delegate want to do the work.
Every age.
And what, no matter what the age is and so forth, and that they would take the time even before offering themselves to do their level best to learn some things about what we do, the processes and so forth and everything. So I think when the committee gets this back, that is something to look at, but we're prayerful that the person would have been vetted properly. Just wanted to address that.
Yeah, and comment to that, Dr. Witherspoon, what we find is that if there isn't any front load to those who are considering to be candidates regarding the responsibilities, the structure, the rules, the polity of our church, they get elected and they are not quite aware of what to do. So what I would be hoping is that there would be some structure around what's required to be a delegate. We know that's in the discipline, but what's required at the general conference? What is an interfacing committee? What does it mean, merit, non-merit? I mean, these things are in the discipline, but we don't really have a vehicle that's responsible for ensuring that all candidates go through this process so they can have the information. And I thought maybe this resolution would be able to address that. So that's why I
On the
brought it
front
up.
end, gotcha. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
As we move forward, the next piece of legislation that we will present is from the Judicial Administrative Judicial Council Committee. And let me say that this information that we are presenting has been adopted by the 50th session of the General Conference, but it did not find itself into the discipline. And so, because it was not in resolution form. And so, this information will be presented in resolution form that it might be presented and placed in the discipline. And part of the Judicial Committee's concern was that they wanted us to understand was about the suspension of the rules for the Judicial Council's term limits that were suspended at the last General Conference because they did not want to vacate every office on the council at that time without having some folk, as they brought new folk in, to have some people with experience on the council at that time. And so they have submitted some things to us. And this committee is in agreement with them, and they'll make this presentation at the General Conference. One of the recommendations was about the budget for the Judicial Council, whereas the Judicial Council has not received an increase in allotment for 20 years, whereas $25,000 a year is used to pay expenses for the 9 members of the Judicial Council at all official meetings and general conferences, as well as cover any other expenses. Whereas the individual members of the Judicial Council not only serve without compensation, unlike bishops and general officers, but also subsidize their attendance and official functions and all working of the council. Whereas since the last increased expenses have increased exponentially, transportation, lodging, registration, food, etc., are at an all-time high. Members can only be reimbursed as funds allow, and usually individual officers and others pay the cost of printing, internet, telephone, and other costs for doing business. Whereas we are unable to become unable because of lack of finances to hold any hearings outside the 2 official meetings, to do any training, or even to vet future candidates for Judicial Council. Whereas we have never been able to save enough to cover General Conference expenses, we have paid transportation, registration, lodging has been arranged by the convention manager and the CFO. At the last General Conference, we were on our own for food. Therefore, let it be resolved. We respectfully ask for an increase of $5,000 per year that would amount to $30,000 per year plus expenses of General Conference. Therefore, let it be further resolved. We recommend that the full expense of the members of and its ex-official president be paid for by the General Conference budget. Their recommendation concerning the budget. Are there any questions?
I think I have 1 or 2 observations.
Dr. Tracy?
Just wanted to bring to the attention that we also have a legislation regarding alternate members' participation within the Judicial Council. And so that was written by, I think, Ms. Goff. You were instrumental in putting this piece of legislation together with the committee. Whereas you feel that those that are elected should have an opportunity to participate. Ruth, are you there? I just wanted her to make sure that
I couldn't get the thing unmuted. Yes, that's mine. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I just want to let you know that it's within the legislation group that went to the Chief Justice and the Judicial Council for them to include in their recommendations to the General Conference. And also the nominating procedures for the Judicial Council were already presented and adopted at the last General Conference, but was never put in resolution form. So consequently, it never ended up getting into the Book of Discipline. So the Judicial Committee, Ruth, I understand you helped put together the resolution that will move forward so it can get into the Book of Discipline. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Dr. Miles?
I just have a question. Thank you. Joel Miles, Michigan Conference. Did you say they were asking for $5,000 a year, which came to $30,000?
5,000 additional dollars to the 25 that they received.
That does it for 30.
Yeah, but that's not, I'm thinking if it was 5,000 a year, that's only 20 total. But okay, when you said
Well, they're already receiving 25.
right, that's what it's, I got it at that time.
5,000 additional.
Okay, all right.
Sure. Dr. Witherspoon, the ad hoc committee.
Thank you very much. The ad hoc committee has several pieces to come before the body tonight, and Reverend Todd Combs will read through our report, and I will ad lib where needed, ad lib clarification, etc., wherever needed. Our committee is responsible for a couple of things. Number one, there may be some resolutions that were presented, that were requested to be presented to be, that may not have had merit at the time, or were not able to get to the floor. And if we felt as though they should be considered or at least explored for discussion, that will be included in our report. The other thing is we have some additional things, proposed resolutions to come before the body today, and you'll find that a few of these deal with the budget and so forth. So we will explain as best we can. And one other thing, several other the committees who are not able to report tonight, we will report during this ad hoc time as well. So please bear with us as we go through. Reverend Matada Combs will present.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bishop Starnes. Minister's Bill of Rights. The resolution for the Minister's Bill of Rights was presented at the 49th General Session of the General Conference and received a non-merit status. It was also presented at the 50th General Session of the General Conference and was not permitted, to move forward. It was our determination that we revisit the Minister's Bill of Rights and that it be assigned to an appropriate annual conference. Information regarding the Minister's Bill of Rights has been previously submitted in resolution form. Information is forthcoming in February at the Board of Bishops meeting, and other direction will be given at that time.
There's a committee that is working on the Ministers' Bill of Rights, matter of fact, on the ad hoc committee. But there are persons who are also working, who are interested in the presentation of the Ministers' Bill of Rights. So we are requesting that we're able to take this back, and at the February meeting, we want to add some solidity to this and bring it back before the House so that we can discuss it even more so in detail at that time, once the committee has met again and done its work. So forth. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you, sir. Passing of the character of the bishops.
Do you have a concern, Bishop? Do you want to say something? Okay.
I'm looking down. Won't be my eyes on my forehead.
Passing of character of bishops. This subject was addressed in the Orlando, Florida meeting. As we gathered as a denomination, many sons and daughters of Varick have expressed favorably the passing of the bishop's character. As in our church, everyone must be accountable. Clergy and lay must complete a process in which they have their characters passed. In that vein, why should the bishops be excluded? It is our belief that a resolution from an annual conference is forthcoming.
So there's been much discussion about that. It is not coming from the International Ministers of Lay Association, as we know, but that has been, as you know, in our bylaws, our bylaws say that we deal with concerns, issues, and so forth that come before us and so forth. So a lot of discussion around that is being had, and as I'm understanding that a resolution might be forthcoming. Just want to make sure and clarify that.
Work on the restructuring commission. To date, no update has been provided to this committee. Should persons be present, they can enlighten us.
So what that means, in our Episcopal area, we have persons who are on the restructuring commission. They are not here today to address that. So, but we do know that they're working very hard to bring something to us. And so hopefully by February's meeting, we'll have something that comes from restructuring.
The budget, life after elimination of the debt service. Sister Welch and Dr. Coleman are submitting budgetary concerns to this gathering. Some proposals and information have been submitted by Mrs. Ruth Goff for our consideration and directed to an annual conference for resolution.
Mrs. Goff is on the line, and I have distributed to you. I've asked for distribution of information from Mrs. Ruth Goff, and let me ask Mrs. Goff, would you like to present this? So as we look at this too, from here to our budget committee, you have a resolutional form, but to the budget committee, make sure everything is tweaked, and then of course, your proper annual conference. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Goff, would you like to present each resolution, and then we'll ask for conversation and dialogue for each.
Thank you, Reverend Witherspoon. First of all, let me say that I thought that budget concerns, when we left the general conference last time, were given in a motion that Reverend Anthony made to the restructuring committee. And I endeavored to listen to every report I did hear, and I never heard anything about budget. At our last meeting, Bishop Moore was available, and I asked him specifically why there had not been any information on the budget. He told me that they were not addressing that and that there was no budgetary concerns presented. As a matter of fact, we did not even have a budgetary committee. At the last general conference, one of my biggest concerns was that there were no resolutions presented to the budget committee that I remember. I may be wrong, but I don't remember. So I just set out to try and develop some resolutions, because personally, I, Ruth, don't care what we pass, except we pass something. We can't, in my opinion, leaving the general conference again with the strength of the church being the formula is not working. So, if Reverend Anthony, did you reproduce the budget, the resolutions I sent?
Yes, ma'am. Everyone here has a copy.
If you just, they're pretty self-explanatory. So if you would like to read them, I would be satisfied with that.
Okay, Reverend Combs will do that. Thank you.
Budget resolution, $100 a member. Whereas every church in the Zion Methodist Church is given an apportionment to pay. Whereas every church in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church is expected to pay their apportionment according to its perceived strength and not its membership. And whereas this method is most often unfairly assessed across the denomination, whereas the apportionment is developed in the eyes, logic, and or mind of a few and not the many. Therefore, it be resolved that every church of the EMA Zion Church and the Zion Connection should pay connectional claims in the amount of $100 per year. Be it resolved that each member of the EMA Zion Church should pay general claims in the amount of $100 a member, including all overseas work. They should pay in their own monies directly to their country bank to be withdrawn by the treasurer of the general church, and all funds should be paid directly to the general church every first Sunday, starting June, in the amount of $100 a year, once a year, $50 twice a year, $25 quarterly at the time of the quarterly conference, $10 a month for 10 months, or $8.34 for 12 months. Be it further resolved that the monies be deposited immediately into the general church account and reported to the annual conference treasurer for the purpose of record keeping. Respectfully submitted, Ruth E. Goff.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Wait a second.
Budget resolution of 2 cents, number 2. Whereas every church in the Zion Methodist Church is given an apportionment to pay. Whereas every church in the African Methodist Episcopal Church is expected to pay their apportionment according to its perceived strength and not its membership. And whereas, as this method is most often unfairly assessed across the denomination, and whereas the apportionment is developed in the eyes, logic, and or mind of a few and not the many, therefore it be resolved that every church of the EMA Zion Church and Zion Connection should pay general claims in the amount of 2 cents on every dollar raised if at the end of the quadrennial, the church has paid more than they have paid in the past then whatever amount that was one half of it would be returned to them. And it be further resolved that this formula should include all overseas work. They should pay in their own monies deposited directly into their country's bank and to be withdrawn by the treasurer of the general church. And all funds should be paid directly to the general conference by the next business day following the service and no later than 3 days. And be it further resolved that following every Sunday worship service or after any midweek prayer service or any one of 3-day revivals or fundraisers, 2 cents on every dollar raised during the activity on the day be deposited immediately into the general church and reported to the annual conference treasurer for the purposes of record keeping. Respectfully submitted, Ruth E. Goff. Any questions? Budget resolution, a tithe, number 3. As every church in Zion Methodist Church is given an apportionment to pay, whereas every church in the African Methodist Episcopal Church is expected to pay the apportionment according to its perceived strengths and not its membership. And whereas this method is most often unfairly assessed across the denomination. And whereas the apportionment is developed in the eyes, logic, and mind of a few and not the many, be it therefore resolved that a formula of 10 cents on every dollar raised by every church of biblical tithe, and be it further resolved that each AME Zion church should pay general claims in the amount of 1/10 on every dollar raised. And be it further resolved that if at the end of the conference year, if the church has paid more than they have paid the year before, then whatever amount is over 1/2 would be returned to them, the church, to be divided equally between the pastor and the congregation. And be it further resolved that this formula should include all overseas work and their own monies deposited directly into their country's bank to be withdrawn by the treasurer of the general conference. Be it further reserved that all funds should be raised directly, all funds should be paid directly to the general church by the next business day following the service and no later than 3 days. And be it further resolved that the following every Sunday worship service or midweek prayer service or any revival service or any fundraiser, that the tithe of 10% on every dollar raised during that day should be deposited directly into the general church account. And be it further resolved that the monies be deposited immediately into the general church account and reported to the annual conference treasurer for the purposes of record keeping. Respectfully submitted, Ruth Goff, General Conference Delegate, Northeastern Region, New England Conference.
Are there any comments, any dialogue regarding the same?
I have a comment, Mr. Chair. Sheila Quintana here in the West.
Office on the line. She can also address speak to your concern. Go right ahead, please.
Yeah, a comment more than a concern. Here in the West, Bishop Staccato Powell has implemented a tithing mandate. And what has occurred is our assessment to the national church has not changed. That money is paid, but it's paid by all of the local churches each month, submitting 10% of whatever they brought in. And what we have found, because God does the mandate for tithing, is that we have recovered more money than we had when we were just simply paying the assessment, because God has blessed that. It is not a law as far as it being part of the church polity or law, but in the West, what we find is that our smaller churches that have maybe 19 children they are struggling to meet assessments, but whatever they take in, 10% of that goes to the annual conference, and that annual conference assessment, the National Church receives their money, and the rest stays in the annual conference for the blessing of the growth of the ministry. So we went from 25 churches to 52 churches with this process. We also, at the annual conference, if the amount that was given in tithe exceeds the previous year tithe, because we're going into our 4th year, then half of that goes back to the local church. Half goes to the pastor as a check, the other half goes to the church. So I know it's a new mindset in Zion, but we're actually doing it out in the West, and I want to share that comment.
Thank you, Sister Sheila.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Thank you so much for sharing with us, Dr. Quintana and Sister Goff.
Reverend Naila Hubbard,
Yes.
my question, I think I got a little bit confused. One of the resolutions or 2 resolutions before this one suggested that each member pay $100 or 2% on the dollar. Can you say that one again? 2 cents on the dollar?
Therefore, be it resolved that every church, the EME Zion Church, and the Zion Connection should pay general claims in the amount of 2 cents on every dollar raised. If at the end of the quadrennial the church has paid more than they paid in the past, then whatever the amount was, 1/2 of it would be returned to the church.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Mrs. Goff, and to all Zoom, those who are Zooming, and for those who are present, we will, this will go to the Budget Committee, for language sake and so on and so forth. But Sister Goff, when you were with us at the Board of Bishops meeting and Ministers and Lay Association gathering, you'll be able to present the same to the gathering. And of course, at that time, there could be more dialogue about the same. But thank you for your work that you've done.
You're welcome.
Suspending the General Conference rules regarding the election of a indigenous bishop for the work in Central South Africa. We desire to ensure as a body that the rule to elect an indigenous leadership be suspended, primarily in that the present bishop of the Central Southern Africa work stated that the work is not ready for indigenous leadership at this time.
Any comments?
Can you just tell me what we're saying? Are we saying that you can have indigenous leadership in one place, but at somebody else at a discretion, you can decide that you're not going to follow the rules?
No, what we're saying is we passed that by a certain time, we would have indigenous leadership throughout Africa. And so Central Southern Africa is included in that time, in that timetable. The bishop of the area now has said that at the present moment, so in other words, if we go by what has been voted upon and enacted upon it, it would mean that we are ready to elect an indigenous bishop now for Central Southern Africa. The bishop serving that area has said at the present moment, he does not feel that we are prepared to do so. So therefore, to be in compliance, we would have to come back with to suspend that rule.
What can I ask? Why is it necessary to suspend the rule because if the area is not ready, there will be no one there who fits the criteria. So it's null and void.
Yeah, but because we have passed that legislation, to make sure that we're in compliance, we would have to suspend the rule going forward so that we're not out of order.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
This is Darrell Starnes. I was just going to say what you said, that we have to respect the laws of the General Conference. We just can't ignore them. And I think what the bishop of that area recognizes is that the qualifications to be a bishop require a person being a member of an annual conference as a traveling minister for 20 years and other qualifications. And so all of those qualifications are a part of his assessment of the readiness. As you know, some of those areas have only been with us. I think Angola has only been with us a certain amount of time, bringing in Malawi, Mozambique. So, and South Africa has only been with us for a certain amount of time. And so that is why the bishop made that assessment of the readiness. But he and we all on the Board of Bishops are in agreement that indigenous leadership as the episcopacy needs to be there, but it takes a few years for all of the requirements to be met.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Pastoral Care Division. This resolution was adopted at the 2015 Legislative Summit and was not submitted to the General Secretary and Auditor. And as much as there is a necessity for the proper pastoral care, and in as much as the 2006 Book of Discipline of the African Methodist, 2016 Book of Discipline, of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church speaks in a very small part to the pastoral care and counseling under the section Part 5, Clergy and Specialized Ministry. It is our recommendation that this be strongly considered and referred to an annual conference.
Any questions, comments?
He was talking to me, I missed it.
We're gonna read it again for our bishop.
Don't tell him who.
For the person who missed it.
Pastoral Care Division. This resolution was adopted at the 2015 Legislative Summit and was not submitted to the General Secretary Auditor. Inasmuch as there is a necessity for proper pastoral care, and inasmuch as the 2016 Book of Discipline of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church speaks in a very small part to the pastoral care and counseling under the section Part 5, Clergy and Specialized Ministry, it is our recommendation that this strongly be considered and referred to an annual conference. Any other questions? Next, qualifications or rules for a preacher. As it refers to paragraph 180 in the 2016 Book of Discipline of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and it speaks to possession of a sound mind, we strongly recommend it be sent to an appropriate annual conference.
Page 71 of the discipline, paragraph 180. Number 1, the external call consists of those gifts and graces requisite to the proper and faithful discharge of the duties of the Christian ministry. We expect those who possess We expect those who profess to be moved upon by the Holy Ghost to preach, A, to evidence an unmistakable conception of salvation by faith, B, to possess a sound mind. So this resolution is requesting that we change possess to possession of a sound mind.
Next, Committee on Board of Records, Statistics, and Archives, Historical Society.
We got something different.
Sorry about that. Reparations motion, forgive me. With the adoption of Resolution GC 50-R08, which was adopted by the 50th Quadrennial Session of the General Conference, which recommended the 50th Quadrennial Session of the General Conference directs that the Social Justice and Economic Development Committee evaluate the recommendation for an internal call for reparations and shape the pyramid policies and initiatives of the Pan-African Commission on Reparations. We recommend that it be sent to codification. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any questions for the ad hoc committee? Humbly submitted. Are there any questions from those who are Zooming? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Witherspoon. The next report is on from the Board of Records, Statistics, Archives, the Historical Society. And the report we received indicates that there is 2 recommendations, one from the committee and one from the consultant of the committee. As we are aware that the Historical Society operates out of the office of the Secretary Auditor, and it's a part of that department, and the committee is recommending that it remain a part of that department and have an additional increase in its budget for it to do its work. But the consultant has recommended that the department be separated from the Secretary Auditor's office and be a standalone department as it was in the past, and that it be given a budget of $120,000 to operate in that department. And what they're asking is feedback from you, which way it should go. Should they remain under the Secretary Auditor's department, or should they submit the proposal to make them their own department again as it was in the past? And they just need some clarity from this body as to what we think they ought to do, how they should proceed. Any question?
Excuse me,
Yes.
did they submit a budget?
They submitted a request for the budget. The board or the committee has recommended that they remain as a part of the Secretary Auditor's department, and their budget would be increased by $20,000 in order to do their work. But the consultant for the committee is recommending that they withdraw from the Secretary Auditor's office and have their own standalone office and have a budget of $120,000.
Does that mean we need to have another general officer?
Didn't address it.
Was not addressed in that regard.
Well,
Just another department.
let me just say, as a amateur genealogist, they need to be separate. However, that's a big piece of a budget for us to say 120,000 when you only want to give the Judiciary Council 5,000. That, to me, I know that they don't go together, but my mind goes together like that. So my concern is that that's a lot of money, and maybe what needs to happen is more money for the separateness under the umbrella of the Secretary Auditor. That's all.
And so the feedback that we will give to the committee is that some persons feel that they should be a separate entity, but also operate under the umbrella of the Secretary Auditor.
Yes.
I just wanted to comment as well, Dr. Quintana. We had a really thorough restructuring committee to look at all areas of our church structure. So would this not be referred back to them to see about actual implementation and cost? Because we were restructured from over 44 committees to 16, standing and administrative. Does this fall under this, or is it a separate thing?
Dr. Witherspoon?
Thank you, Dr. Quintana. It possibly could, you know, given the amount of work that they have and what's on the agenda, but it possibly could. So that lends to a conversation as to the same.
Thank you. I just wanted to make that recommendation.
Dr.
I certainly agree with Dr. Quintana that it would seem to be the job of the restructuring committee to consider this. However, before this body has considered, we understand that the consultant has recommended that it be treated in a separate but we don't know the criteria of what is the reasoning there. I can't judge the wisdom of that reasoning without knowing it. Who is the consultant?
And it was
Reverend Harold O. Robbins is the consultant.
Consultant.
No, he's a preacher in the Anglicane Church.
Some people might not understand the consultant structure.
What did she say?
Standalone is 125.
Because they might think that you hired a consultant.
And the role of the consultant, all our committees had consultants that worked along with the co-chairs, and especially those that had expertise in a certain area. Dr. Robinson has been a historian. He's currently working with Bishop Walker on taking history since Hogarth to the next level. So we certainly respect his point of view, and we also respect the committee as a whole. They're just at this divide right now and trying of opinions because they all have a passion for what's best for the church. I know that I work very closely with the committee that helps to support the Historical Society. And I do know that because of all the work that currently the General Secretary Auditor is trying to implement, the quarterly conference changes, the changes with the Book of Discipline. I mean, we're just virtually, I think, running on overload. And so the work that I find that's suffering a little bit is on the Historical Society. I'm not saying that we pull it out and becomes a separate department, but we need to do something so that we're able to shore up that work, because without our history, how can we ever, look back and be proud of who we are, especially with the emphasis as we're moving towards our next major celebration as a denomination. So right now, they're just looking for whatever thinking might be of the people here, the members of Zion, what might be the best thing to do. We are at a point where we're retiring our debt. Debt service is not going to be as high as it has been previously. Where should some of our new focus areas be in terms of financial support? Maybe this is an area of consideration. I don't know. This is why we bring the questions to Zion.
So we will get that information, these responses back to the committee for their consideration. We have nothing from budget. General church growth and development.
Yes, my partner. My vacation. Okay. Church growth and development. I am just so proud to be serving on that administrative board, and our administrative leader is here, Dr. Starnes, Bishop Starnes, who leads us in that direction. As you know, when back at the 49th quadrennial session, when the restructuring committee came forth and really changed around a lot of the departments and roles, responsibilities, and names and all of that, there was a lot that needed to be done to bring our language and our discipline up to date. So last year, when we were looking at church growth and development, Lakeisha stepped forward, being a co-chair of that committee, and said, well, instead of us looking at the resolutions that the committee, meaning the administrative board, had presented them with, they wanted to go back and look at the language and what that could be in terms of bringing it up to what the departments should be representing today. So I'm going to have her speak to that, but to let you know how to move forward, the Keisha Committee did her work. They presented it back to the administrative board. I served on the resolution committee for the church growth and development. We went through and retooled and looked at what her thoughts were of the committee. And now I'm going to let her address that. And then when she gets back to us, feel in terms of the changes and the adjustments, then we're going to look at merging the information, taking it back to the administrative board to review, and then we will look to move forward and see how it comes forth to the general conference through the administrative board. But we certainly appreciate the partnership of having young eyes and to look at where we are and where we need to be in terms of our language and our position of our department. So Lakeisha, you could speak to that, please.
Thank you. So when we met in Rock Hill, we did examine the language, and there were several inconsistencies. So there were places where it still said Bureau of Evangelism instead of Department of Church Growth and Development. There was some inconsistency with the executive director and then director, which could cause some confusion for local churches or conference directors. versus the executive director. So our recommendation was, instead of adding new pieces to the work, let's make sure that the department is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing in the first place, and then we can start looking at adding new pieces. So we are appreciative to look at what we recommended and then offer some additional pieces that my committee will be reviewing and presenting in February when we meet again. February or March.
Thank you.
Oh, Ella is snorting. Stop. Oh, goodness.
Next report would be that of the Board of Lay Activities. And they're concerned about their bylaws being permanent, a part of the discipline. And so they are submitting a resolution to make sure that that takes place. That's the last report that I have. Dr. Witherspoon.
One last report or request. As you know, as a body, we address issues, concerns that are brought to the body or that we recognize. I received a call in which I was asked if we could discuss, since we are retiring the debt, as we look at the expansion of our work in Africa and in other places overseas, that we would look and discuss, consider, give dialogue to and feedback to the possibility of establishing extra or more Episcopal districts, We know that we have 12 Episcopal districts, but the concern is that with the growth that is happening, especially in other areas of our church, that we be able to effectively give oversight to the work that is here. I guess in some ways, I know in some ways that is kind of something we have addressed when I served on the restructuring commission, because the concern is that with the health and welfare of our areas, that proper attention be given to those areas. So I was asked if we would discuss that. We'd like to hear from you, your thoughts, those who are Zooming and those who are present, on your thoughts about expanding the Episcopal districts.
Dr. Witherspoon, before you move on to that, if I missed something, we can skip over part 9 for the Christian education.
Oh.
Okay, let me come back to that after we do this, since we're on this, and then we'll come back. Okay. Are there any thoughts regarding establishing extra Episcopal districts or new Episcopal districts?
Yes, I'd like to say something. Dr. Witherspoon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Evangelist Boatman, Reverend Boatman. The name is Zion, Reverend Boatman. And I live in Nebraska. I have traveled the Midwest most of my life. I have lived in probably about 24 states and probably over 50 cities. And during my time in ministry, as well as my educational years, I've traveled quite a bit. Recently, I had an opportunity to work for the government in South Dakota, and I have also worked and lived in North Dakota. I went to college in Minnesota. So the upper portion of the Midwest, sometimes we don't realize that there are populations of African Americans, such as in Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and even Montana. We've filtered ourselves in quite a bit of areas in expanding, and some have been in these areas because of housing or because of the pipeline. But for whatever reason, African Americans do live up in the North area. They are suffering greatly, especially in areas such as Fargo, North Dakota. There's been a lot of tension and problems between authorities and African Americans. And I say African Americans, and I also want to mention Native Americans as well. But our attention in the unzioned, or we can say, quote, the unchurched area, to me is a very crucial matter, because we are not able to expand the opportunities of the AME Zion in these areas unless we have available leadership. And, you know, our leadership right now is already stretched, you know, with the concerns of the church, the current denomination, and the concerns of the church government. And it's really difficult to stretch out in these areas and reach the unchurched, and as the Lord would have us to reach the souls in those areas. And I just want to take a few minutes just to let you know, even here in Nebraska, we have 80,000 African Americans, Black folks, living in Omaha, Nebraska, within a 10-mile radius. We have been predominant in this area for a long time. We need strength of our leadership in the AME Zion Church. Our young people, our young males or Black males, they do not have adequate leadership roles. And a lot of them do not know of the AME Zion history. Their parents came up from the South, and for the railroad, the livestock exchange, and the packing houses. And now we're 3 generations away from that generation that came up here. If you were to open up a poster, which I have one, showing them all the bishops that have been with the AME Zion since 1776, and they're actually in shock because they have no idea that there are Black bishops. They have no understanding of that. We do not have a predominant curriculum in our school systems, even in the university. You could take an elective in African American studies, you know, if you can afford to take that you have your other prerequisites to do. But in the educational, in the elementary and the secondary, there's not very much information on African American history, AME Zion, just a touch basis on slavery and the underground, just a little bit Frederick Douglass, maybe you might get that. But there's not a lot of emphasis on that education, and there is a gap in the history from the Zion in the north and the east and the west. You've got the empty area of the upper Midwest that needs some attention and needs that opportunity. So you can say that there's some spiritual starvation, and there's also some cultural and ethnic starvation in these areas. So if we were to have leadership, even part-time, a part-time leader that would come into those areas just to assess them, just to let the people know about the AME Zion, I think it would probably reduce a lot of the Black-on-Black crime. You know, we have, where I live at here, it's the most dangerous place a Black person can live is Omaha, Nebraska. You're liable to die here as a Black person before you will Detroit, Washington, D.C., or Chicago. This is one of the most dangerous places to live as a Black person. A lot of people don't know that. But if we were to give our youth, our Black men, an opportunity to know the AME Zion, the history, give them something that they can look forward to understand that this history has been going on for a long time, and it's rooted out of slavery, and it does transition into the North, into their history. So I know I've been a little long-winded, but I've always wanted to say something. I've spoke to a couple of bishops in regards to having a little more presence in the upper Northwest area. And I do want to mention, we are in Colorado. We've stretched out into Alaska. We just need to make sure we're covering Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, the rest of Nebraska, and we did have one minister up in Minnesota in St. Cloud area, but she's no longer up there for whatever reason. But that is a multicultural area in Minnesota. But these areas are very, very prevalent, and a great opportunity for Amy Zion to stretch into those areas for the leadership.
Okay, thank you. So am I hearing you correctly, said that you're in favor of additional Episcopal districts? Am I?
If you want to put it in a short-term sense, that's what I said.
Okay, all right. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes. Please tell us who you are.
Renee Burns, Louisville District. I just would like to make a suggestion as we look into church growth and development, that we recognize that it is a social media era and a technology era. So that means that you cannot show your presence or build somewhere if they don't even know who you are before you get there. I know there's not a lot of millennials here right now, but as a millennial, you look, you Google, you search before you go. So if I don't know who you are, I'm not inclined to come and hear you speak. That's sad to say, but that is the reality of this day.
So are you speaking more specifically to church growth, or are you also speaking to in favor of expanding Episcopal areas? So, okay, church growth and development will take that. Gotcha. Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Sharp.
Charles Sharp, I think the two go together, the idea of church growth and development and the additional Episcopal area. From what I've heard so far, the primary purpose of the additional Episcopal area is to gain focus in terms of church growth and development. So they seem to be inextricably linked, and we should consider that.
Thank you. Bishop Starnes and then Sister Hannah.
I am very excited about what God is doing in Eastern Africa because of the leadership of Bishop Staccato Powell and Bishop George Crenshaw. Because of their work during the 3 years of this quadrennium, there will be thousands of people brought into the Amy Zion Church, hopefully at the 2020 General Conference. Hundreds of churches, several conferences in Uganda, more than one, Kenya, Namibia. Through the work of Bishop Crenshaw, churches have been planted in South Korea and the Congo. I think 3 conferences in the Congo. All of that work is going to be brought in, and even more than what I've named. Another conference in Angola is going to be brought in. And because of all of this work, I don't know the numbers, but it's up to 400 or 500 churches and several conferences, thousands of people. This may be the time where there will be a need for another Episcopal district, possibly for Eastern Africa. This is an exciting time because we have never been in Eastern Africa. For a long time, we've been in West Africa. And through the work of Bishop Rochester and others, we've done work in South Africa and moved up to Central Africa. But it is in these last 3 years that God has brought about a work. And it just may be that this general conference approaching might be the time, because there needs to be oversight of all those conferences that are coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hannah.
Sharon Hammond, Tennessee. Bishop Storms touched on one part that I was going to lift up, but I'm also thinking, is now beginning to be the time to tighten up some of our other areas, England, India, the islands that our bishops now are currently presiding over and hopping from all over the world. Is there an opportunity for an Episcopal district in those areas as well?
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
Eric Shoemake, Bishop Starnes, in the discussion of establishing new Episcopal districts, does that mean there should be a resolution at this general conference to add Episcopal leaders to the current configuration?
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying.
Yes.
And
Restructuring can look at that as well.
I think when you talk about adding an Episcopal district, you're talking about a bishop, adding a bishop. That's what you're asking, right?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, that's what
currently we have
12
bishops have work that is spread out all over the place, different
well, it's 12 Episcopal districts and 12 bishops.
Right.
If we don't add an Episcopal district, it's going to be
more
bishops spread out even more. Now to Sister Hannah's question, the reason that many Episcopal areas have an overseas work that is not on the continent of Africa is because if we had an Episcopal district that was all Caribbean, for example, they would not have the support that the domestic Episcopal areas provide. For example, Midwest supports Trinidad. And so the resources in the Midwest are used to support Trinidad. The resources in Piedmont is used to support Jamaica. The resources in the Mid-Atlantic Episcopal area support Barbados and Guyana and something else. The resources in Northeastern Episcopal District support Bahamas and India. And so if we took all of those and put them together, there would be no resources to support. And that's why we have it is now.
Yes.
Dr. Witherspoon?
Yes.
There's someone, go ahead.
This is Reverend Nathan from London, England. Are you hearing me, sir?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
I'm just speaking on behalf of the issue in regards to the need for another or more indigenous Episcopal leadership. I have had the opportunity to have worked and traveled through 26 African countries. And on the continent of Africa, at this point in time, there is an unprecedented revival going on the continent. And it would be wise that we give attention to that revival movement that is taking place. In the month of June, I was in Kenya and meeting some of the folks on the ground who are going to be coming into the AMESAN Church. The challenge that we face would be, how can we effectively govern such a large area as East Africa without an indigenous bishop? The work would require some level of national knowledge and cultural knowledge to be able to hold that work together. So I'm speaking in favor of the necessity for an indigenous bishop in that region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I relate to that. I chair the committee on the restructuring commission that wrote it originally, so I can understand some couple of people in this house have been to Africa and other places. So I appreciate your sentiments on that. Someone else who was zooming in.
Yes, Dr. Reverend Boatman here again. It seems to me as we were speaking, we have three particular areas that we're speaking in regards to as issues. We're speaking in regards to expansion. We also are speaking in regards to restructuring. And one of the sisters that spoke after me, she kind of hit the, is it the nail on the hammer? Yeah, she hit the nail on the hammer. She mentioned about the millennials and the Saturians. You know, we are now in a social media age. The bishops that we do, if we do expand the leadership, we need to make sure that these leaders are well versed in social media, because we're going to be able to touch parts of the world like we're doing now. We're on social media now, and we're going to be able to expand. If we can't be there physically, we can have a virtual presence there. So we're speaking about expansion. We're speaking also in regards to restructuring, and we're also speaking in regards to the capability and qualification of this additional leader, which would be a person that has a social media emphasis in their approach to their leadership. And it's almost a necessity to have that qualification for this additional leader that will come in. Thank you.
Or have persons on the team that can help them.
Yes. Yeah, we're talking about a different strategy here. We're talking about expansion of what we already have and a restructuring, redistricting, so to speak. But I think the Episcopal Committee needs to look at the whole picture and define whether or not these areas need to be restructured before they decide to expand where they will expand. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Dr. Witherspoon, could I come in again?
Yes.
Reverend Nathan once more. I want to thank Reverend Boatman for her contribution. I am not aware of the fact as to whether there has been any strategic investigation of areas of the United States of America that has not an AME Zion presence. And I would think that the Church Growth and Development Department ought to take such a stance in putting together a strategic plan that identifies where African Americans and Native Americans are living in the states where we are not present, and devising a strategy for us having a presence in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Clearly, there is a movement in which our church is being called to make sure we're participating in, as well as as Christendom is concerned. But we'll take this back and have further discussion, even in February, and look at how to put teeth to it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for lifting up Christian education. The reason why we did not go into any detail about it is because the consultant, Dr. David McLean, and his committee, we did not hear back from them on the progress they were making with their work, because the next step they had to take was to get together with the General Secretary of the Department of Christian Education to see if they would be in alignment or compliance or agreement with the recommendations that were being made, because a lot of it has to do with the structure. Let me just share with you a few of the thoughts that they had. And so we didn't want to get out before the committee, but I'm sure everybody who's here listening won't tell anybody. So, and they have concerns about the composition of the local Christian Education Board. They're recommending there be a reduction in the number of persons on the board. They're recommending also that all local Christian education boards partner with other school programs, feeding programs, and other useful agencies to provide needful services for our children. They're asking to ensure that all persons in Christian ed are adequately trained, and they're looking to partner with colleges and seminaries to provide that training. It may be able to happen through the annual conferences, and they're also recommending realignment of the regions in Christian education departments, so that the regions need to be aligned in the Episcopal areas, and that the General Secretary of the Christian Education shall exercise overhead administration over all aspects of the Christian education at every level. And then they're asking that they add to paragraph 527 that the Episcopal districts directors would work with the General Secretary of Christian Education to carry out the work of the department. So as you can see, that their thoughts and their ideas are all about the restructuring and all of these areas, and we would look for the Department of Christian Education to include this in their recommendations or portions of this to the General Conference for adoption. So I was trying to be a little bit careful about trying to get ahead of the committee, and don't know if they had a chance to have the discussions that they wanted to with the current Director of General Secretary of Christian Education. The other department that we did not mention was one that Dr. Lee was doing for one of his administrative areas, having to do with the Ministry of Kindness, and it was something he was able to handle and just send right through his annual conference. So we don't, that was just was common sense. Any other questions? And just for myself, I want to say thank you. I'm not at my desk. I've been traveling since 6:30 this morning. And, but I wanted to make sure that we came to meet with the Midwest so that we could have an opportunity to share and hear your voices in this whole process of developing our legislation for the next General Conference. Thank you. God bless you.
Before we turn it back over to our president, Dr. Witherspoon, I wanted to take a moment to thank the persons who volunteered to help us today. Our keeper of the record, our scribe today, Sister Lorraine from the Stoner Church. We had two ushers from the Hewlett Temple Church with us today. And also Sister Vicky from Broadway Temple volunteered. She was going to be our timekeeper, but since we were all on task and didn't have to have nobody tell us to sit down or stand up and sing to us. We want to thank you all for coming and helping us out to make our meeting run much smoother. Thank you.
Amen. I want to ask before I come back, I want to ask Pastor Reverend Barbara Hagler to come, and the host presiding elder, Reverend Evans, to come and greet us in their own way before we disperse, before we dismiss. Amen.
I guess that means you're gonna wait till I'm finished.
I don't know how long you're gonna talk. I can sit as long as I can.
Oh, okay. We're certainly delighted that you have come to share with us at, here at Broadway Temple. And, you know, Bishop Starnes, I like to make my guests want to come back again. So though you said not to prepare anything, we do have a little chicken and some little finger stuff in the bag. So we know that you, many of you traveled and you got here, and so we were hoping that you would get it prior to the beginning of the meeting, but we can sit and talk and just have some time of fellowship. So again, we're delighted that you decided to come in to share with us.
We like those now.
Thank you, Pastor Hager, who is such a generous and gracious host. Just to reiterate, we are always glad to have family. We are grateful that we could accommodate this session, and we feel that it has accomplished its purpose for gathering tonight. We want to thank the leadership of Dr. Witherspoon and those who assisted. And again, thank our bishop for his presence and to be here with us to just encourage us. Again, thank everybody for all that you have done. And again, God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me add my thanks to all of the thank yous to Dr. Tracy and Reverend Shoemake, who have engineered this train, having left the depot, and now we're on our way to doing some major work in our church to continue to do that work. I want to thank also our technician, our Facebook person, our
I don't do your Facebook.
our website person for M&L, amen. A very, very capable and most able Sister Lakeisha Womack, who helped us to zoom in today from all across the world. 40 people have zooming in with us, and approximately, amen. And 20 who are here with us today, plus 2 little ones who are doing homework elsewhere. But that just speaks to where we have to go, what we have to do. We have to acknowledge the fact that where we might not be able to be physically, we can still be there in spirit. So thank you to those who are zooming in for your presence on tonight as well. And let's give them a hand. And I have to thank our sound person, our sound technician for helping us on tonight. Burns, thank you, Bishop Starnes, for your presence. One of my Episcopal fathers who is here. I'm going to ask Mr. Burns if she would close us out with prayer. We have Bishop Starnes, would you like to come and say a word before Bishop Starnes?
Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Witherspoon. I just wanted to thank Dr. Witherspoon, the Ministers and Lay Association, the Connection Council, for bringing this to the Midwest area. I want to thank you for your work and the way you're going about your work and the kind of consensus that you are attempting to bring about important issues. You are involving the administrative boards. You are involving the general officers and their departments. You're involving the wisdom of the church. And I just appreciate the approach. And then you're bringing it to various areas of our Zion. You had the meeting in Rock Hill, and then you had the meeting in Orlando. Is that right?
And also at Greensboro.
And in Greensboro. And you brought it here. And because of the technology, just in this meeting, we heard from the Northeast, which was Boston, I think. I think Sister Goff is still in Boston. We heard from England, Reverend Nathan. We heard from Nebraska. We heard from California. And so this is just marvelous. I do want to say that the best laid plans of men and mice don't always come to fruition, because I said to myself, I'm going to come and I'm not going to say anything until I'm asked to give remarks. And I told Presiding Elder Evans, don't let me say anything. And so he's fired. But it has been a joy. And so some of these people know me, so they could tell I had something on my mind. So I had to start listening like this. But thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Stone. I was going to ask Reverend Burns if she would come and close us out in prayer, and also bless the food.
Say hallelujah.
Thank you so much for the chicken.
Let us pray. Our Father, my God, we thank you for the great opportunity to be in this place at this appointed time. We thank you, oh God, for our leadership. We thank you for those that are physically present in this place and those that are tuning in right now, oh God, that wherever the seed is, wherever it is planted, oh God, we ask that you send down an increase. Right now, oh God, we ask that whatever we need to do as a denomination, that we do it for the edification of your kingdom. Use us like you've never used us before as we organize and as we set these things into motion. Allow things to change, oh God, but allow it to be acceptable unto thy sight. We pray right now, God, for the food that is prepared for us. Allow it to be nutritious for our souls and for our bodies. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
If you by chance leave, I know you